Love, marriage, and money. On this episode of Through the Pines, we'll discuss the importance of marriage and finance. Welcome to a financial planning podcast with the down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch listens while hot tubbing under the stars. This is Through the Pines. Our advisors for this episode, we welcome back Rex Baxter and Brandyn Smith from planwithbaxter.com, the 2023 and 24 Forbes Best in State Wealth Management Teams for Utah, advisor Hub, fastest growing advisors to watch under $1 billion, and the receivers of the Ameriprise Client Experience Award, both in finance and both married. So Rex, Brandyn, thanks for being on the show today. Brandyn, we'll start with you because in the notes, you have words.
Yeah. Right. So I want to maybe put this out for debate, and feel free to pick this apart if you'd like. But I guess my thesis is that financial happiness can be achieved on a tight budget. More money can, make more opportunities. More money is more fun. More money can be less stressful, but you can still have financial happiness within a marriage on a tight budget. In addition to that, to further the thesis is that more money when you add more money to someone's income, I don't think, from what I've seen, that there's a dramatic correlation between increased money and lack of financial fights within a marriage. I
think so too. And I mean, can you fix a bad marriage with more money? You just throw money at a marriage.
Right. Not a chance.
Yeah, not a chance. Okay. Rex, initial thoughts on love, marriage, and money.
On his thesis?
Well,
I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of love, marriage, and money. So we could probably just end the podcast right there, don't you think?
Yeah.
I think Brandon's got a great thesis. I think that the more money somebody makes doesn't necessarily change how they fight about money. I think that the psychology of how one spouse handles money versus the other spouse handles money will transcend that income scale, and if they're predisposed to fight over financial matters, then they're going to continue to fight over financial matters.
I was watching it was one of my favorite shows, the $1 Million Listings Los Angeles, an episode the other day, and Josh Flagg showing a house, and this couple are fighting over everything, and I'm just thinking, this is the worst relationship. I don't know if it's for the show. You don't know what they do behind the scenes, but I'm like, I don't even know how this is like the worst thing ever. And they're buying this multi-million-dollar house in LA, and it's going to be this amazing thing. And I'm like, this house isn't going to fix their relationship. That's what I'm thinking.
It's like trying to have a baby to save a marriage, right? Same kind of thing.
Oh, that's rough.
Bad idea.
Yeah. Well, we have some notes here. What is it that causes financial conflict within a relationship? Not feeling fairly treated and lack of communication. What do you talk about these one-on-one, Brandyn? What do you think?
Well, I think maybe talking through these, and I was hoping for more disagreement, but that's all right. If we're all in agreement that money doesn't fix financial problems, because I worry that a lot of times clients think it will. Right? That they're like, man, we've been making the same amount of money for the last 5 years, and it's just not enough. And if we just had an extra 5,000 a year, an extra 10, or an extra 20,000 a year, we'd resolve all the conflict. And
money does solve problems. It depends. What kind of problems are you talking about? Like the relationship problems within the
relationship problems.
Okay.
But the problem with just making more money is eyes always get bigger, right?
Yeah.
You have to control at some point. You have to say, all right, that I will keep my lifestyle within that, which is much easier said than done, right? I don't know that anyone's perfect at that, but usually that doesn't change, right? Your ability to do that as you earn more money. And so these were some thoughts that I had, right, as far as what causes financial conflict within a relationship, because I do believe it can be overcome. I do believe with proper understanding and communication that people can go from a marriage of contentious, finances to a marriage where both spouses feel fairly treated. And so I guess a couple of these, I think it would be good to talk through them. Number one, not feeling fairly treated, whether that's true or not true. And I've seen that a lot, right? Where a spouse says, man, this person, gets to go out and they buy all this big stuff and I don't get what I want. But then they're going out and buying a gazillion little things, right, that add up to way more than the other stuff, right? And I guess it doesn't matter, in my opinion, whether it's true or not true. I think what matters is how it's perceived. And I think that's also where maybe some of these other ideas can come in and helping people have better communication and better thoughts about, where money is coming from, what they can do with it.
Rex, from a financial planning standpoint, and we'll talk more about this in just a minute, and getting both the, people in a relationship on the same page, but how much of it is feeling, how much of it do you go into this, like, I'm going to be a psychologist for a minute and, let's talk about how are you being treated financially? Like, how do you go down these roads here?
It's tricky because it definitely can be a rabbit hole, right? That you kind of get stuck down. And so typically I'll try to help at the edges, as far as try and help grease some of the conversations and share examples that hopefully they're talking to each other about afterwards, on their ride home or over dinner, and they'll talk about, wow, we're not like that couple, and it'll kind of start to cause some common ground through some examples that maybe we've shared with them over the meetings. But it is tricky because a lot of times those arguments are stemming from a different set of values and a different set of upbringing, what they've seen in their parents.
Yeah.
And that's so deeply rooted that sometimes it's hard to get them out of that tunnel vision of their own experience and able to see things from a different lens. And so that does help if we can work with our clients to get them on the same page financially, or at least close to the same page, and focused on the same goals and attacking the same goals, even if they have slightly different values around money, whether it's security or safety, or whether it's pleasure and enjoyment, then we can start to get their goals aligned and start to get them on the same page as they try and do that. But it's tricky.
Well, what about the second bullet point here says lack of communication, and that's probably one of the biggest things, is just not talking about it at all. So how do you even? That's got to be a little uncomfortable as a financial planner to be a marriage financial counselor at the same time.
It is. Sometimes I wonder if I should get a degree in that. So it's hard because I think not only lack of communication, but kind of fighting fairly comes into play too on both of those. And so sometimes it makes me think of a client that came to me, and this was years ago now, but he had rolled his 401k over into an IRA account, and we had talked about kind of the uses and the money, and he would not bring his wife to the meetings. He didn't want her involved. He's like, this is my money. I worked for this. This is mine. This isn't hers. And next thing I know, he's pulling it all out and buying like a 1965 car that was his dream car, paying all the taxes at one time, blowing the retirement, just for the sole fact that he wanted to make sure he got his toy and she didn't get access to any of the money. That's how severe that can get at times.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a good relationship.
Yeah, it's rocky. But it's unfortunate, because I think if you address those issues earlier in the marriage, and so a little shout out to our marriage and money podcast, as far as when you're first getting married, talked about those questions on the front end, you can start to at least begin the discussions of where your starting points are around your values and money.
That was a spite move, man.
Yeah, that was brutal.
But a lot of it comes down to goals, right? Like if and that's what's hard with a marriage, is he might say, hey, it's worth it to me to jeopardize my retirement in order to get this car. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's a very real sentiment. And I think we'll get into it in the next section a little bit more, but there seems to be kind of like, on one extreme, you've got people who are spenders, and one extreme, people who are savers. And having that in a marriage can be very difficult without communication. And it's not like one is right and one is wrong, right? Because on the extreme saver, And you get people who just save, literally never do anything with the money, never are charitable with the money. They just like stow it away in a big pile that grows into perpetuity, and they never use it, never enjoy it, right? I don't think that's necessarily the right answer. On the other hand, you have people who are super, super fun, right, and want to do everything, but at the risk of jeopardizing their retirement. And I don't think that's the right answer either. I think the right answer is somewhere in the middle. And so you just have to, but the further you and your spouse are away from each other on that, I think inherently the more conflict. I don't think it's necessarily bad. And a good example of that is, I guess my wife and I, we're both, I think, inherently savers. We're towards the saver side. But my wife wants to like go travel a lot more. Like if it weren't for her, I don't think we would have ever gone and done any of the fun things that we've done, right? And I'm so grateful that she has pushed me so many times where I can think of every single vacation that we were going to spend any amount of money on beforehand, me thinking, I'd rather just leave this in savings. Like I'd really rather just keep saving this. And her being like, no, we got to go out. We've got to go experience the world. And man, hindsight, after all of it's said and done, I'm so grateful we did it. But she also has me kind of wrangling her in a little bit sometimes, say, well, look, we need to, let's make sure we hit these things. And so I think there's a balance between the spender and the saver. And I think communication, though, is the answer to that. Going back to the car guy, if he could have communicated like, hey, this is what I really, really want, and a spouse saying, hey, I think that's too much. I don't know, can you find the common ground? I think sometimes the answer is no, but I think trying and communicating is the best way to try and achieve that if it's possible.
Sure. Rex, what about addressing different pain points within a marriage when it comes to the financials, not necessarily anything else, but when it, someone might feel like Brandon said, is a saver and wants to be a saver, one's a spender, but also like debt and credit card debt or just hiding money or hiding purchases, those types of pain points that aren't great for a healthy financial. They're not great for a good relationship. They're definitely not great for a healthy financial relationship.
Yeah, I think when we talk about pain points, it's interesting because I think there can be true stress, which can be related to pain. If for one person, a savings account gets under a certain amount, then that's extremely stressful to them.
Yeah.
And that can cause tension and arguments that, gosh, we only have, $1,000 in our savings account instead of $50,000 in our savings account. And then the other side of the spouse might be, my gosh, we got $50,000 in the savings account. We can afford to go out to eat dinner once in a while, and so you're going to have those different pain points. And on the flip side, we see sometimes that happens with credit cards to where some couples or some individuals are extremely comfortable maintaining and having large credit card debts, while that's extremely stressful to the other partner. And again, it comes down to that lack of communication. If you can talk about why it's stressful to you and why it's creating that stress, or why you believe it should be lower or higher, either on the savings side or the credit card side, then you're more likely to understand each other and come to a common ground as to what's going to work for the two of you. But we do see, significant different pain points based on, again, background, upbringing, things that they've experienced throughout their life and their relationship with money. Yeah.
Well, another thing that can cause some consternation in relationships is different long-term goals, Brandon. So, maybe one wants to, retire in Hawaii and the other one does not, or something, so how do you work on the long-term goals together when you're financial planning, you're planning for their life, their whole retirement. And then when a couple has different goals, how do you bring those together financially?
Yeah, I think this is where financial planning is so important, because we can help project those goals, those various goals that people have, and show them the cost and benefit to those decisions. So one spouse needs to have a cabin, right? Because man, their parents had a cabin, your grandparents had it, and it was just like this great family member. because usually it's not usually just selfish stuff, right? Like they have a vision for what they want their life to look like, whether it's a cabin or travel or a boat or other toys, right? Like people have this vision of what they want. And I think financial planning helps us put that together and say, all right, if that's your goal, here's what we need to do. And then as a couple, they can work towards it and figure out, all right, is that worth it? Like, can we mold our life around that to get to that end goal? Because a lot of times, and every couple is different, but a lot of times you have a saver who just feels very financially uncomfortable, right? They just don't feel, they don't know what it is. They don't know what they need to feel comfortable. They just feel like they need more. And I've seen people in that situation to where they will hoard a savings account up to 100 or 200,000 and will literally say things to me like, I just need that $200,000 in savings. It just makes me feel good, right? Yeah. Forget that I'm losing crazy money on interest. Forget that I'm foregoing other, potential life experiences. That 200,000 just makes me feel good. And that to me is usually means that they're not understanding necessarily. That might not, maybe they do, right? And that's fine. We've got clients that do that, and we're all right. We're here to support them in that, as long as they all the parties involved understand what the cost of that is, and maybe we can get by without having that much earmarked and set aside for life, and be able to hit other financial goals. And so helping people talk through options and helping people who feel insecure find some security. When I can show them, hey, if we can just set aside this much every month, then we're on track for retirement and we don't need to worry about retirement. And then if we can maintain this in savings, then you guys are safe. Like, you're safe, right? And here's why you're safe. Then that allows the other spouse to, maybe get a little bit more of what they want. And so I think a lot of times the conflict comes just simply from a lack of understanding where they are financially, because people don't speak in financial literacy or think in financial literacy terms. And so if we can help produce some clarity via financial planning, then it allows them to more strategically make moves within their financial lives.
Rex, how do you remedy these long-term goals that are maybe different in some marriages?
So those are tough. Those are tough dilemmas.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get different life experiences where you might have one spouse, let's say the wife, for example, where her parents passed away due to cancer at young ages in their 50s. And so from her life experiences, there is no 60, 70, 80. Right? There's no long-term. Her long-term is 50. And so she wants, she may want to go on trips all the time and spend the money and spoil the kids and spoil the grandkids, because there is no 60, 70, 80. And then you may have a husband where, they're celebrating his mom's 103rd birthday.
Yeah. And
they were done working at 65 and ran out of their financial assets at 80. And have been living, in poverty for the last 20 years. And that's his life experiences. And so from his experience, he all of a sudden he's, I want to save for tomorrow. I want to make sure that I don't live like my parents and run out of money when I'm 80. And from her perspective, there is no 80. And so how do you find common ground in that? Those are tricky situations. And I think communication helps, and trying to plan for both as best we can, and finding that common ground, helping those clients understand that, okay, we need to find a balance between the two. But it's interesting how often they haven't discussed that, and they haven't found, the fact that that's why they feel that way about money. So they've never had those conversations. After 30 years of marriage, they've never had that conversation, which is astounding to me sometimes. But that's again, it goes back to that lack of communication.
Is that like a quiet moment before, when you ask that, or you find that out? How awkward is that?
I keep thinking of, I can't remember what TV show it is, but all of a sudden, or radio show, but there's somewhere where all of a sudden they have this big old awkward kind of buzzer that goes up, and it is awkward sometimes. Sometimes it is an awkward silence, and it's not necessarily he who speaks first loses. It's just a matter of, okay, let's take a step back, let's bring down the emotion, and let's just kind of talk through some of these things and see where we really need to find this common ground. And the hard thing is we're not trying to create additional conflict. The last thing we want to do is have them go home and start bickering and fighting about the conversations and what's gone on during the financial planning meeting. But we do want to stimulate conversation. We do want to try and stimulate that communication between them.
Yeah. Can you feel the tension sometimes when you
Sometimes
start?
you can cut it with a knife sometimes. Absolutely.
Jeez. Yeah. Brandon, talk to me about we've got spenders versus savers and what this means. And I think because you got spender versus saver twice. So is it spender versus saver, spender and spender, and a saver and a saver? Oh, we lost Brandon now.
It is, but that's what it is.
Okay.
Brandon, is we do have, there's typically 3 different types of couples that you end up with out there. And so typically you'll end up with, one that's a spender, one that's a saver. Both of them are spenders, or both of them are savers.
Okay.
Are typically kind of what we'll end up with. And I think as we go through each of those, and I'll let Brandon kind of start going through each of those, but I think the dynamics of each of those are very different in how you plan and how you work with a couple and their financial goals.
Yeah. All right. We got Brandon back here. So Brandon, talk to me about the spender versus saver.
Yeah. And sorry, I just duplicate those. So spender versus saver is, in my opinion, probably the most common client that we come across.
Sorry, this is one spouse is a spender and one spouse is a saver.
Correct.
So not necessarily versus, but one is one and one's the other. So
yeah,
there might be versus, but yeah, okay.
Usually it turns into a little bit of a versus, right?
Okay.
And I think the answer to a lot of these, honestly, but especially to spender versus saver, is the financial planning. It is defining what is most important to each spouse defines to the other what is most important to them financially. And I know that's something my wife and I have done, right? Where I've said, all right, this is like at my base level, this is what I need to feel good, right? I need X amount in savings. I need retirement to be on track. And as long as those things are done, like those are my biggest things. And then I kind of like to also spend some money on this, and this, but this is like my number one, like this is what I need to feel comfortable in life. Right. Yeah. And then, my wife might have a spender might have a different set, which is likely, hey, I need to not feel like I'm missing out on life. I need to feel like I'm not missing out on my younger years. I need to feel like I can spoil my grandkids, whatever it is. But usually there can be some common ground where you can make both of those needs fit together and come together. And maybe there's some concessions in the likes. And so I think spender versus saver, financial planning, that open communication of what is absolutely needed most. And it's important not to discount what someone's wants are. I think back to we were in college, just putting ourselves through college, not a lot of money. We were just on the tightest budget ever. And my wife wanted to buy like some pants, and I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. Like I was newly married, right? So I was just like, you've got tons of pants. Like that is not a need. Like we don't need more pants. Like your pants look great, but then I had this aha moment where I realized, no, that's like, you want pants in the same way I want to buy like the small little RC helicopter that I was looking at, right? And it's like the same price, but she would get as much joy out of pants as I would out of an RC helicopter. And I think we need to view that the same way, even if it's on bigger scales, right? Like you want to travel and you want an emergency fund, right? Like, and there's different wants. And both are valid and both are needed. You need to communicate and you need to respect the other person's point of view, because usually it's not just one's right, one's wrong.
Yeah. And this does, we should mention during this show that we're assuming that most of these relationships would like to stay together. So
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, right.
Let's go with that assumption.
with that.
That's a
Okay.
good assumption. Let's go
Okay.
with that assumption that we're talking on these situations as if we want the marriage to remain strong.
Correct. Because I could
So,
only imagine you in these conversations, and one of these spouses is just going to use something you say to be like, "That's it, we're done, I'm out. We will never be married because I will not save that, or I will not, you know what I mean." So I can only anyway. This for this episode, we're just hoping everyone stays together here.
I mean, everybody has their own deal breakers. I don't think finance should be that. Like, I don't know.
We'll talk about that here in a minute, Brandon. So Rex, let's go spender versus spender. When you run into the family of spenders, how do you rein them in? What do you talk about? How do you get these two to maybe sort of save?
a lot of these are not clients for very long.
Yeah.
Let me just put it that way.
These are the clients who received a large inheritance, and we see them for about 1 to 2 years.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, those are tough because they live check to check, and so the critical thing when you're dealing with spender and spender is Brandon's favorite line, which is make it automatic. Is your savings, if you're dealing with spender and spender, is
Yeah.
you need to make sure that your savings and everything for your goals is automatic, because when it hits that checking account, it's going to be gone pretty quick. And so you want to make sure that 401ks are being funded, IRAs, if that's whatever the situation is that you're dealing with, that it's as automatic as you can possibly make it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be self-aware enough to recognize that.
And if
you have to be self-aware.
Yeah, and if it, and that's great, Rex, because if you can be self-aware and then have someone like you, Brandon, planwithbaxter.com, to just say, help me set up whatever I need to set up so that whatever hits my checking account, I can just spend. I can spend all of it and not feel bad,
The other thing with this is sometimes there's still marital strife with the spender versus spender, right? It's not like they're both just like, here we go. Like a lot of times they're both spenders. One spending on a bunch of ATVs and the other spending on a bunch of like clothes and you look at the amounts and they're both spending astronomical amounts of money. And sometimes there's tension on that, right? Like, hey, you're the reason we're living paycheck to paycheck. Like, no, I'm not the reason. Look at that big truck. Look at everything you're spending on your nail. Yeah. I mean, like it can get really bad that way, right? Because usually spender versus spender turns into check to check, which turns into why don't we have enough money even if we're making crazy money, right?
Right.
And so I think making it automatic, working with a financial advisor to get that rolling, but then also, working with each other to try and make that a fair split. A lot of times, and every couple is different, but a lot of times we get one spouse that wants to spend on really big, expensive things, big toys, big vehicles, big vacations, and other spouses that just want the daily nice drinks or the nice going out to eat or, all of those things that really add up too. And so, being conscious about how you're spending money and making sure that as a married couple, one is not overspending the other, right? That someone doesn't feel like they're getting abused that way.
Okay. And then lead us into saver versus saver. Is that ever bad?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. These are the couples that get to the end of life and have massive accounts and have kind of missed out, right? And you do see this a lot, and their kids are bitter because they're like, come on, like why can't we go make some memories? Why is everything and I don't know. And to me, it's mostly missed opportunity, is because the goal of financial planning is not to die with the most money. The goal of financial planning is to be able to utilize your assets to bless your life and the lives of people around you as much as possible. And so I think saver versus saver, though maritally they probably have the least amount of conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've maximized their enjoyment and joy in life.
They might be happy as pie. You never know. Rex?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think on both, right? Like I'll go back to spender versus spender for a second, because it can, the other part of that, even if it's automatic, you can get into toxic revenge spending, right? And so you can get into, oh gosh, she bought this, so now I'm going to go buy that. And then he bought
Totally.
that, and I'm going to go buy this, right? And so
Totally.
I think you've got to be a little bit careful there. On the saver versus saver, even though you don't get into a lot of marital strife until you start looking back at missed opportunities and missed life experiences and things like that, I think the real damage sometimes is done on the next generation. I can't tell you how frequently we talk to a set of clients and their habits have been formed because they saw how their parents dealt with money, and so therefore they wanted to do it differently. And so the thing I see on saver versus saver is that their kids then become spender and spender a lot of times because their parents didn't ever take them on trips. They didn't ever let them go to the grocery store and splurge or whatever it is that they're doing. And so I think those are your kids are watching you, and so I think you have to be careful.
Oh, they are. They really are. Brandyn, so let's talk about this divorce rate here. You got some more numbers for us?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And how much of this is based on money, perhaps, or financial issues,
right?
At least self-claimed.
So this is from Forbes, and the article goes into things that cause divorce and what common things around divorce, and obviously, no surprise, one of those is finances. And so they reported that 38% report financial problems as the divorce cause. And so I think we have to be careful how we interpret that. I don't think that means 38% just didn't have enough money to have a happy marriage. I think that very much means 38% couldn't get on the same page and align their goals together such that it became a very significant issue.
Yeah, and if that's the case, Brandyn, so say you've got one spouse that hides credit cards and spends a lot but doesn't want to make sure the spouse knows about it, and so how do you fix that? Is it fixable? I mean that's where I'm assuming some of this divorce comes from.
Yeah, that's hard, right? And I think if you can communicate with, and maybe you need a therapist, maybe you need a financial advisor, but if you can communicate and get on the same page as to what that spouse is trying to get to, right? What is it that they are trying to solve that feels like they need to do that, right? Because I think most spouses most people understand loads of credit card debt is not helping me financially, right? It's not helping me enjoy life better. It's not helping me spend more money. So getting to the bottom of what is it that makes you feel like you need to spend like that? And how can we take what we have in our marriage, whether that's a lot or whether that's a little, how can we take that and help you feel fulfilled and feel like you're getting, not getting the short end of the stick, but feeling like you're being fairly treated with. But at the end of the day, everybody has their individual choice. Everybody has their ability to make decisions, and you can't force anybody to do anything. And so I'm not saying it's always possible, but I think it very much can be worked through.
Right, on these notes here on marriage and finance, you have some pain points. We're going into the pain points section here, which is the last section, and then you listed some basically numbers and savings. You want to chat about how some of these numbers and savings affect different, I guess, marriages differently?
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. But I think just to point out, there are some people who need $100,000 in savings, or they don't feel comfortable. Yeah. Other people, that number's 20,000. Other people, that number's 10,000. Other people, that number is zero, right? As long as I'm not in debt. Other people can carry $10,000 or $30,000 of credit card debt without flinching, right? And everybody's different. The problem is, let's just use the example of 10 and 20, right? Someone might need 20,000 in savings. The other person might feel really good with 10,000 in savings. In that marriage, the person who feels like they need 20 is always going to feel like there's a little bit of a pull, right? Because the spouse that feels like they only need 10 whenever they're at 15 or 17 or 18, the spouse that feels like they're comfortable at 10 is going to be eyeing that $8,000 and saying, hey, why don't we do something with this, right? We've got enough in savings. Let's go spend it. Let's go make memories. Let's go do something. And so the problem, that I guess just pointing out what the problem is that there's always going to be a pull, right? Where one spouse feels like, hey, why aren't they letting me spend, the money that I could do something really fun with, and then the other spouse saying, hey, I need that there. And that's true, right? Of 20 and 10, that's true of $10,000 in credit card debt, right? I've seen plenty of people who have fantastic jobs, fantastic careers, are very smart, have retirement savings, but insist on having $20,000 of credit card debt, right? That's just where they've been their whole life, and it's comfortable. They financially understand it doesn't make sense, but they just can't get past for whatever reason. And that's fine, right? That's part of the benefit of making it automatic and building up retirement savings so you can still have a retirement. But yeah, that's one of the problems of two people coming together, right? Is they have different views, and how do you solve for that?
Rex, how much do you need in savings to feel comfortable?
Me personally,
Yeah.
a lot. No, it's interesting because as we go through these questions, I don't know how the two of you are, but I'm always sitting there and catching myself, just imaging myself and saying, okay, where am I at on this? And it's interesting because sometimes I find myself all across the board, and my guess is our clients are like that too, to where there's times where I'll be an extremely focused saver, and then there's other times where I'm in our relationship, I'm more of a saver, my wife is more of a spender, and yet when I spend, it's generally on something big. It's generally not. I'm not a big, small, or boy, that makes sense. Not big, small. So I don't spend a lot on small items.
Yeah.
But when I spend, typically it's on something big, and expensive. And so it's always interesting because she might do a bunch of little things and then I do one big thing, and so luckily we get along really well, and we tend to kind of balance each other out that way. But as far as our savings, I like to have a good solid emergency fund. Being in kind of an entrepreneurial type of business, doing financial advising, to where your income can fluctuate with economic cycles and with financial markets and things like that, the income can fluctuate. And so I tend to lean towards the heavy end of an emergency fund as opposed to the light end of an emergency fund, is where I tend to land. And I think that that's fairly common with people that have fluctuating incomes, that they should be leaning towards that heavy end. But it is amazing to sit there and look at all these different clients and how comfortable they are along the spectrum of savings versus debt, and even within their own marriages and spouses. I think it's highly unfortunate that there's an enormous stigma against therapy and counseling, because I feel like sometimes it is an addiction where counseling and therapy would be significantly helpful for some of these couples, to kind of go through and dig in and figure out what the root problems are. Advisors in their nature are not therapists. We're not counselors as far as marriage counselors, and
well, police officers aren't in their nature counselors either, and it seems like that's a lot of what they do. They're psychologists. So
and I think that there is a lot of blending of that, and we've seen enough experiences to hopefully start conversations. But you probably also need a professional. It's one of those things like an accountant, like an estate attorney, to where if you're having issues like this, to where you're self-aware enough to see, whether you're a spender and the spouse is a saver, and it's causing marital conflict, and you can't get on the same page on goals and things like that, then I don't think that you should be afraid to go and ask for a third party's assistance in trying to kind of figure this out, and do it on a unified front. Right? Communicate with each other and say, hey, look, let's just figure this out. It's not worth costing our relationship over, and so let's try and talk through it and see where we need to go.
All right, Brandon, lastly here, let's go over the differences between being having a joint financial account and a separate financial account. What are the pros and cons of each, real quick?
Yeah, we get those questions all the time, where people say, "Hey, now that we're married, should our finances be joint?" And the answer is it depends, right? A lot of times on first marriages, we see joint, accounts, and that has pros and cons. In second marriages, third marriages, a lot of times we see separate accounts. What's always been funny to me is it's not like that's necessarily making it fair, right? Rarely are both spouses making the same amount of income. So how do you do that, right? And a lot of times they have arrangements. Well, he covers this and I cover that, and they've split out their expenses, but the dollar amounts don't line up. And if the dollar amounts line up, then the fund spending amounts are different, right? And so there's really I have not seen a perfect way to do that. The trouble with joint accounts, like having all the money together, is well, you still have to decide who gets what, right? Like, and is one spouse spending more or the other? Do both feel like they get what they want? And so I don't think joint accounts versus separate money necessarily solves that problem. It seems like marriages that have joint accounts tend to work a little bit better, just from what I've seen, just because you kind of feel that more of that unity. But it really ultimately comes down to, are you taking care of each other? Are you watching out for each other's back? Are you trying to make sure the other one feels taken care of and that they, have what they need to feel secure and safe and like they're fulfilling the life they wanted? And I think that ultimately comes down to communication.
Yeah. Well, yeah, use that word a lot here. Rex, final words on finances and marriage and finance and all that good stuff.
I'm a fan of it all. Marriage, finance, love. I'm just a fan of it all. So, I think final words would be talk, communicate, fight fairly, right? Understand that you're both trying to hit a common goal from different grounds.
Fight fairly. This is a new buzzword from you. I haven't heard that. So that's
that's
good.
It's the holiday season, so I think it's important.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's a good one.
So I think the more self-aware you can be and the more patient with each other you can be, the better off you're going to have, the more success you're going to have at working through any financial tension that might be in your marriage. So
yeah. Very good. Well, that is it for this episode of Through the Pines. I want to thank Brandyn and Rex for joining us once again. You can find them at planwithbaxter.com. You can find us at Through the Pines on Facebook and on Instagram and YouTube, where you can watch our wonderful, beautiful faces. And then, of course, on all of the different podcast platforms out there, whichever one is your favorite, please make sure you are subscribed. Also, if you found value in this podcast, you consider supporting us at buymeacoffee.com/BanyanMedia. You can give us like a one-time donation, or you can just set it up and you give us like $20 a month for life. It's like a retirement for us. It's fantastic. Watch and subscribe to us on all the things. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.